a space where we merge science, spirituality, and psychology to help you achieve optimal health and wholeness. Hey there, welcome back to Healing with David. Today's episode is going to be on the 3 stages of burnout, what they look like on labs, and what you can do to reverse them. Before we get started, I want to introduce a little bit about my course, the Burnout Breakthrough Healing Accelerator. If you're interested in identifying your root cause to chronic burnout and fatigue, I have a course that walks you through step by step on identifying your root cause through functional medicine lab testing, various self assessments, and I give you detailed case studies from my own practice. And you're going to create an individualized plan based off of real world protocols that have worked for people exactly like you. I guide you through A to Z as far as creating a plan that includes nutrition, movement, emotional healing modalities, nervous system rewiring techniques, and much more. It's really the thing that I wish I had at the outset of my journey. So if you're interested, go ahead and take a look in the show notes or in the description, depending on where you're watching this podcast. And one last thing before we get started, I want to make sure that you have all the resources you need to really take this from helpful to healing. And specifically, I want to talk about functional medicine lab testing that you can do at home. In terms of identifying which stage you're in and what you can do about it, I recommend 2 major labs and then a third one, which is kind of a nice add-on. The first one is going to be the stress, mood, and metabolism test. It's going to really bring together your stress hormones, your thyroid hormones, and your sex hormones. The interplay between these 3 variables, as well as how you're managing your blood sugar, are really going to help you quantify the impact that stress is having on your life. Additionally, if you happen to have a thyroid panel, a full thyroid panel, not just your TSH, you can do something called the men's wellness or the female wellness test, which is just going to be your cortisol as well as your DHEA. We're going to talk a lot about those 2 variables today, and you can find all of those in the show notes. The other lab is going to be the hair tissue mineral analysis test. It's going to measure your level of heavy metals, how well your nervous system is being regulated, and we're going to do that through looking at your electrolytes, as well as all of your other minerals like zinc, copper, selenium, phosphorus, and many others. It's a very powerful lab that I recommend doing once a year. And then the third one is going to be the Candida metabolic and vitamins test. This is a gut health lab that is not just looking at gut health, though. We're also looking at neurotransmitters because we all know that your gut is your second brain. And we're also looking at a full vitamin panel, mold markers, ketones to see if you're fasting or usually over fasting, and much, much more. So all of that is going to be in the show notes or in description. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I just wanted to make sure that you had all the resources you need to really have the rubber meet the road with this content. All right, well, let's get right into it in terms of the 3 stages of burnout. You could also refer to these as HPA axis maladaptation, but I think burnout really kind of broadens the scope because there's a lot more going on besides just adrenal health here. So the first stage is going to be the anxious energy stage or the alarm stage. I don't typically see a lot of clients in this stage because, well, they think they can take on the world, really. A lot of times this stage will feel like difficulty shutting down the mind, feeling ramped up or on edge. A lot of times, especially more mesomorphic or pitta-based people will not really interpret it as being anxious, but rather as being driven, right? And there's really kind of a very subtle difference between the 2. Many times they're so in their head, so disconnected from their body that they really are unaware of the nervous system dysregulation that's taking place. And it could even be very painful to drop into the body because then they would actually have to feel what is going on. So like I said, I'm not really seeing too many people at this stage because a lot of times they may be running off of caffeine or stimulation or what have you, and they're just not really going to seek out help just yet. So in terms of what tends to make this worse, it's usually going to be, you guessed it, more stimulants. So any caffeine, certain nootropics, any other stimulants that people might take. And stimulants come in many forms. It doesn't only have to be things that we ingest physically into our body, like food, drink, capsules, etc. Another one is going to be HIIT or high intensity interval training type workouts. The reason for this is because we tend to end these workouts in sympathetic nervous system dominance. We tend to stay a little bit anxious. And this is particularly true for more Vata or ectomorphic based body types. So you can certainly still do these high intensity workouts, but you're going to want to end those workouts in a more restorative way. So to really make this more practical, one thing that you could do is actually take, let's say you have 45 minutes to work out, you do 30 minutes of that high intensity interval training, and then you do 15 minutes of stretching with conscious breathing, maybe even vagal toning exercises. So that could be a way to balance it out if you really want to get in that style of training. And I think it's an amazing style of training, actually. Next is going to be over fasting. We know that exercise is certainly a stressor, but a lot of people really discount that fasting is a stressor on the body as well. And so, in the right dose, it is medicine. In the wrong dose, it is absolutely poison. This is particularly true for women who are over fasting because this disrupts progesterone in particular, especially in the second half of the cycle. So, if you are over fasting, and when I'm talking about over fasting for most people, what I really mean is that they are skipping breakfast, they're waiting way too long to have their first meal. And it's not because they're fasting too long in terms of hours, but their day has already ramped up. They've introduced stressors into their life. They've most likely consumed caffeine, and they're really not getting support and nourishment in one of the most demanding parts of their day. So that's what we're really speaking about here. What should you do in this case? We'll talk about that a little bit later, but it's not necessarily fasting for fewer hours, although that could certainly be beneficial. And just to be clear, I'm a huge fan of fasting. I think it's the closest thing that we have to the fountain of youth, but many times it is just misused. It's not really taken into account in terms of our modern context, right? Next is going to be scrolling upon waking. So I haven't talked about this yet on the podcast, but there's something called the Ayurvedic body clock. And basically what that refers to is this idea that our bodies are primed to do certain things at certain times of the day. They do it a lot better than others. There's a reason why many people have their only bowel movement of the day in the morning, right? And so typically before 10 a.m., it is the kapha or the earth-based time of the day. So you really want to ease into your day. You want to be monotasking. You don't really want to jar your nervous system too much. So what that means is that any scrolling based apps, anything like your email, Instagram, TikTok, anything like that, you really want to lay off until at least 10 a.m. And the reason for this is because it's even more jarring to the nervous system when you do it before then. Next is going to be blue light at night. Most of you that have listened to this podcast or that are listening to this podcast are well aware of how harmful blue light can be. So really using blue light blockers as soon as the sun goes down is really going to be very beneficial to optimize that circadian rhythm, because typically people in this anxious energy or alarm stage oftentimes can't really get to bed because they have these racing thoughts, right? And of course, a lot of adrenaline. In terms of what this looks like on labs, so if you're watching this on YouTube, you'll see a slide with what the lab work looks like. And so this is the cortisol and DHEA lab. And we are, of course, expecting high cortisol here. So really, most likely over a 13 total cortisol, but you're seeing high cortisol in the morning all the way into the evening. So this person is going to be ramped up. They have a lot of anxious energy. They sometimes may interpret that as drive. Other times it may just be overwhelming and they can't get anything done at all. So it's really going to depend on your constitution there. In terms of the metals and minerals test or the hair tissue mineral analysis test, you're going to see this person is high. So this person is using up a lot of calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium in order to basically, they're just reacting to the perceived threat that is in their system. So that's really what's going on. So in terms of the transitionary stage of this, so there is a transition stage, and this is when the foundation starts to get shaky. And what that means is that the DHEA, a sign that you're moving from the anxious or alarm stage into our next stage, which is called tired and wired, is that the DHEA is going to start to lower down. So that's what I'm going to typically look for, is that DHEA is starting to lower, as well as the story from the client themselves. What this means is that the body is no longer able to keep up with the stress that it's being put under, and it is now going to start coping in different ways. You may start to experience more frequent colds, kind of lower exercise tolerance, and just needing maybe an extra cup of coffee in the morning, or starting to notice that first hour or so in the morning, you're just very groggy, just really cannot muster up the energy to enter your day. So those are going to be some of the telltale signs. In addition to that, you may notice your body's a little bit more catabolic or that it's breaking down. So you may notice a little bit of thinning hair, worse skin, and nails as well. All right, so what can you do if you're in this stage? So there's a lot of interventions that we can do. I've already spoken about a few of them, but in terms of supplementation, I'd recommend a magnesium supplement. So you're going to want to have a blend of malate, citrate, and glycinate. There's a product called full spectrum magnesium, which you can find in the show notes. So you're definitely want to do that. And you may even want to do this starting at lunchtime to really kind of dial down the nervous system. And it's going to be, I'm going to talk about the downshifting approach in just a minute. Next is going to be to break your fast as soon as your stress starts. So if you are keen on intermittent fasting, my recommendation is that you actually fast earlier. So have your dinner as early as possible. So let's say if you have dinner at 6, then, and you still want to do, let's say a 15-hour fast or a 14-hour fast or even a 16-hour fast, then you would go all the way until 9 or 10 a.m. And so having that later breakfast, ideally something that is not too heavy to digest, is going to really be beneficial because as soon as your day ramps up, well, the fact that you had breakfast is going to limit how high your cortisol goes as a result. So the idea that you should have been doing intermittent fasting plus bulletproof coffee, plus maybe taking ketones or electrolytes, this is actually going to exacerbate this condition and really push you into this stage 2 of burnout. Next is really a diet that is Vata pacifying. So in Ayurveda, Vata corresponds to the nervous system. And so being able to have grounding foods such as sweet potatoes, complex carbohydrates, and more is going to be very beneficial. This does not mean you should have processed sugary carbohydrates, but whole food complex carbohydrates can be very beneficial in lowering cortisol. And that's part of the reason why many people, especially Vata body types, when they are on a low carb diet, they tend to feel a little bit more anxious. Next is going to be this thing that I coined called the downshifting approach. A lot of people, especially more of these type A, entrepreneur, perfectionistic types, I was one of them. I'm raising my hand here if you're watching on video. We're expecting our bodies to go from 100 to 0 in about an hour or two in the evening. This is a very unreasonable request for our bodies. So instead, what I would opt for is starting in the late afternoon, let's say around 3 o'clock, is that you start to take different herbs and minerals that really help to downregulate the nervous system slowly. Doesn't mean you're going to be sedated. What it does mean is that you're going to have calm, collected energy, and you're going to design your life in a specific way so that you aren't ramped up all the way until 9, 10 o'clock at night, and then you can't actually wind down the nervous system and get to sleep. There's a lot of great products that you could use for this. One of my favorites is called Adrenal Soothe. There's a lot of great products from Anima Mundi, and I do recommend actually trying the adaptogens individually before using a blend. So experimenting with ashwagandha, with skullcap, with schisandra, all of these could be great. There's a few companies like, I believe, Momentous, Sun Potions, Anima Mundi that have individual formulations of these. So you can just try them on their own, and then you can start to see what works best for your system. So all of that is in the show notes as well. And then lastly is going to be around the higher potassium foods. There's always an emphasis on lowering sodium, but in reality, most people in Western-based societies are not eating enough potassium. And potassium, of course, is found in a lot of vegetables. So increasing our potassium-based foods is going to be very helpful, and mineralizing the body in the morning could be very helpful as well. So having a green juice, for example, with only vegetables and a pinch of something like Redmond sea salt could be very helpful to mineralize and support the adrenals in the morning. All right, so we're going to go into our next stage here, which is called the tired and wired stage. It is sometimes also called the resistance stage. And most people that I work with are usually finding themselves in this stage because at this point, your body's coping mechanisms are heavily compromised, and you're going to start to seek help at this point because it's not very obvious where to turn. So in terms of what the tired and wired stage feels like, it's anxious all day. So you may feel anxious and tired all day, but then suddenly around 9, 10 o'clock at night, you get a second wind that carries you well into the evening. You may notice a breakdown, once again, catabolism, breakdown in the quality of your hair, skin, and nails. You're going to have lower mood that's going to be kind of a combination of anxious but lethargy at the same time. And you may oscillate between the two. Once again, this is going to depend a little bit on your Ayurvedic constitution of which one you skew more towards. The Vata body types are going to skew a little bit more towards anxiety, and then more of the Kapha are going to be more on the lethargic side. But you're still going to have these two elements of anxious but also tired. You'll notice your sleep is heavily compromised because, well, your cortisol is ramping up at night. And so that's going to really inhibit your ability to get deep sleep. So if you track your metrics with something like an Oura ring, you'll probably notice that your REM and your deep sleep are just not up there. And ideally, you really want to get 2 hours of REM sleep and 90 minutes of deep sleep. Chances are you are not getting that. Even if your total hours of sleep are above, let's say, 7 or 8, you may not be getting that quality sleep that is actually going to be restorative. So you end up in this vicious cycle of being tired and anxious throughout the day. You get the second wind at night, and then you can't go back to bed. And then there you are all over again. In terms of what makes it worse, I would say that for a lot of people, it's very easy to reach for the caffeine, to reach for stimulants in order to get you through the day, especially the morning, because those who are tired and wired tend to be extremely tired in the morning. It may take them 2 to 3 hours to really feel awake. So over consuming caffeine really gets you stuck in this cycle. In terms of what you can do about this, I recommend starting with something like 4-sigmatic, which is a mushroom coffee that has lion's mane and chaga, but it's still made with coffee, and it has about half the caffeine of regular coffee. I think you could also switch to something like matcha, which could also be beneficial. But I've just found that switching people to purely herbal or adaptogenic based beverages doesn't really work that well. Really kind of easing people off of caffeine in a way that doesn't impact their nervous system tends to be the best way to go in my experience. And that's also how I dial down my caffeine consumption as well. I'm keeping track of all the products that I'm mentioning, so you can find those all in the show notes. So don't worry about that. In terms of what it looks like on labs, so once again, if you're watching this on video, you'll see what the labs look like. But basically, if you're only listening to this on audio, no problem. I'm just going to walk you through it as well. So you're going to notice that you're going to have a low normal total cortisol, probably below a 9 or a 9.5, maybe even a little lower. And then you're going to have low cortisol throughout the day. And then around 9, 10 o'clock at night, your evening cortisol is going to suddenly be higher than what is ideal, right? So suddenly you're going to have much higher cortisol in the evening. You're going to notice a low normal DHEA. It may not be that low, but it may be lower than if you had measured it when you're balanced. So it's going to be definitely a little bit below that reference range. And your morning cortisol is probably going to be below a 6 or a 7. So you really want your cortisol to be the highest in the morning and then slowly come down over the course of the day. You're going to be pretty low in the morning, and it'll probably look like a pretty even keel in terms of your cortisol throughout the day, maybe a little bit of a dip and a little bit of an increase here and there, and then it's going to raise at night. So evening cortisol is probably going to be above a 0.6. So what can you do if you're in this stage? It can be very challenging because you want to increase your energy, but then you also want to have a healthy circadian rhythm. It's a very confusing stage to be in. I was in it myself for years. I didn't really know exactly what it was or what to do about it. But the first thing is you're going to want to improve sleep hygiene. So the easiest thing you can do is really resist the urge to get caught up in that second wind. So around 9, 10 o'clock at night, ideally you want to get to bed around 10 o'clock. Really prevent yourself from being caught up in that second wind because it's so tempting to watch that Netflix show or do some online research or finally get something done when you have that space. But in the long term, it's really going to hurt you. So getting to bed at 10 o'clock at night, there's a lot of great products out there. You could use daily sleep help support, which I have linked below. You could use magnesium as well. So a full spectrum magnesium with the Adrenal Soothe, with some sort of chamomile tea could be very beneficial. There's also products like Cocoa Chill from Four Sigmatic and also Beam. All of these are pretty solid. You don't want to necessarily use sleep help support or 5-HTP or melatonin in the long term, but in the beginning, they could be very beneficial really to break you out of that cycle. Next is supporting your energy levels during the day with something like a B complex, because your B vitamins are most likely going to be depleted due to the amount of stress that you've been in, because you've already probably gone through the alarm stage. Now you're in the, tired and wired stage. So getting a B complex with methylated B vitamins, so methylcobalamin, is going to be a helpful thing to look out for, and 5-MTHF in particular. Additionally, you can use other adaptogens. So this is where some of those adaptogen type beverages, sun potions, Anima Mundi, there's a lot of great tinctures that could be beneficial, but you really want to stay away from the afternoon caffeine in particular. Removing food sensitivities. So you may want to go on an elimination diet because there are some internal stressors that could be exacerbating what you've been feeling. So what this means is removing dairy, gluten, and eggs. If you want a very easy way to do this, or not easy, but rather a comprehensive way of eliminating food sensitivities, combining fasting and science-backed nutritional supplements, I'd recommend doing a 21-day functional medicine detox. This will really kind of give you a sense of what it means to not have any food sensitivities in your diet. And this could actually enhance your energy levels quite a bit. Many people are pretty surprised how this is weighing them down. So next is going to be, of course, avoiding blue light at night. This is very similar to the alarm stage or that anxious energy. And you want to maintain kind of a longer restorative routine at night. So ideally, kind of 2 hours before your desired bedtime. So let's say around 8 o'clock, you really want to start winding down, whether it be with that magnesium calming tea. It could be starting to take your supplements. It could be just reading a book with a weighted blanket. It could be putting on binaural beats, a sound bath. It may seem a little bit excessive at first, but I assure you, having this really long, nourishing wind down is going to pay off, because within a few weeks, I can guarantee you're going to notice an uptick in your energy levels and improvement in your sleep. And that's really the first step in breaking this cycle. All right, so the last stage is going to be the exhaustion phase, or the true burnout stage. Another term for this could also be early stage Addison's disease. Of course, I don't treat, diagnose, or cure disease. I am not a doctor, so that is my kind of spiel or disclaimer there. As far as exhaustion phase, this is a very nuanced one. So what it feels like is, just no energy to do anything, poor digestion. So you may not be tolerating supplements. You may not tolerate a lot of foods. And yes, you might have food sensitivities, but many times it's that your digestion is just so compromised that you can't digest hardly anything. For those in the exhaustion phase in particular, I highly recommend doing the Candida metabolic and vitamins test. This is going to help you really understand what the quality of your digestion is like, and if you have any major stressors like Candida or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth that are really exacerbating these issues. So another way that you'll know that you're in this stage is you've definitely shifted away from being anxious, and now you're more apathetic and more depressed. So this is agnostic of if you skew towards this or not, but when you're unable to produce any cortisol, your hormones are low, most likely your thyroid is quite low as well, you're going to be more apathetic. You're not going to be able to participate in life in the same way, and you're not really going to be able to do the things that you ordinarily enjoy in the same way as before. So in terms of what it looks like on labs, this is pretty much what it looks like. Is what you'd expect is really having extremely low cortisol. And just before this stage is something called the last stand, where the DHEA temporarily spikes, but really it's going to be low, low, low. So low cortisol, low DHEA, most likely low thyroid. You're going to have this in terms of the metals and minerals test. You're going to have low calcium, magnesium, sodium, and potassium, because your body is no longer able to perceive the threat, nor is it able to respond to that stress. So this is a really unfortunate stage to be in. And I highly recommend, if you're in this stage, to ideally work with a practitioner or do something like the Burnout Healing Accelerator program, because this is a very tough stage to be in. And you're really going to want to use your limited energy on basically healing, right? So you really want to work with someone to guide you through the process, because it could be very taxing to try and do this on your own. So, what can you do if you are in this stage? Really, you want to focus on lifestyle, really getting into the parasympathetic nervous system. So, dialing down stressors. So, having a very simple diet that your body can tolerate that allows you to feel good on a regular basis is going to be very important. Additionally, if there's any trauma, any so any sort of emotional imbalances that you may have, working with something like a internal family systems therapist, a somatic therapist that does body-based techniques. You could do somatic body work and so much more. Working with a hypnotherapist could also be beneficial, but really kind of getting down to the root cause of like, how are you reacting to life? How are you reacting to stress? The reason that I emphasize lifestyle so much, so it's really emotional balance, stress reduction, getting in the parasympathetic nervous system, and sleep, right? This may seem kind of obvious, but your body is unable to tolerate much more at this point. It is really not going to be able to ingest a lot of supplements. It's not going to be able to do a whole lot of exercise. So you really want to have a grounding lifestyle. So I'm going to have a whole episode in the future on what that looks like and kind of what sort of protocols you can engage in. But those are some initial tips. Next is going to be focusing on improving your heart rate variability and your sleep. You may want to do this through something called NSDR or non-sleep deep rest. Somatic experiencing, vagal toning. There are even devices such as the Apollo Neuro or a few others that really help stimulate the vagus nerve. And you can also do something like quantum meditation. You're going to want to support your body with nutrient dense but easy to digest foods. Highly recommend smoothies, ideally not too cold. Smoothies are a great way because they're essentially pre-digested food and you can really pack them with a lot of nutrition and they're very easy to digest. When it comes to supplementation, ideally you want to start taking some supplements, but you're going to want to opt for liquid and powder form and minimize capsules because they're going to be difficult to digest and you have very limited digestive capacity if you are in the exhaustion phase. And next, like kind of like I mentioned before, is going to be finding a practitioner that you can work with. Only you really know what the root cause is going to be in terms of like, should you focus more on emotional balance, on stress reduction, etc. For many of us, trying to dial down stress makes very little sense when we're dealing with complex trauma or unresolved processed emotions in our body. So working with either someone like an IFS therapist or breathwork practitioner or somebody that can, or even a shamanic practitioner that can really help us work with these dense energies that are plaguing us is really going to be beneficial. Of course, when it comes to the physiological aspects, you could run the at-home labs, work with someone like me or another integrative health practitioner. All of that could be really beneficial. But if you're in this kind of last stage, I do recommend working with at least somebody. All right, well, that's it for today for the 3 stages of burnout. As usual, I couldn't help myself and I alluded to other stages that are in between those stages, but it is what it is. I really hope you got value from today's episode. If you are suffering from chronic burnout or you know someone close to you that is experiencing chronic burnout, please send them over to my course, the Burnout Healing Accelerator program. It really is something that you can do just over a weekend in probably 2 to 3 afternoons. And basically, I break down in just a few hours of video tutorials what are the top root causes of chronic fatigue, brain fog, and chronic burnout, how to uncover your root cause, and then how to create a roadmap for healing that is specific to you. So once again, if you got value from today's podcast, go ahead and leave us a rating. It really helps Healing with David get to more people and really expand the reach of this style of mind-body healing. And lastly, may you each find health, meaning, and love. I hope to see you in the next episode. Bye.